I was speaking with Karen in preparation for this to figure out how this congregation kind of organizes sermons, because some places do series and some follow lectionary, and I just wanted to know how to best fit in. And she said, well, we usually follow the lectionary and we focus on usually the gospel reading. And I said, perfect, then I'm preaching from the Old Testament. Because I'm a big fan, and there are a lot of congregations I have found that are not as accustomed to it, which is interesting to me. And there is an extra layer of difficulty. You both have a whole lot more time on it. You have to come at it with a particular paradigm. It gets complicated. But it is a beautiful, messy, wonderful place. And we're going to spend a little bit of time in that together this morning. But to start, I need 4 volunteers. 2 men and 2 women if possible, but it's not really a big deal. We're going to sort of briefly act this out. So you don't have any speaking parts. You just kind of have to walk around a tiny bit in pantomime. Can I get 4 volunteers quick? Please, come on up. Yep, just come on up. Don't worry about... There we go. 1, 2. Can I get 2 more? Come on, be brave. It's okay. There we go. Perfect.
The whole annual conference squad.
Woo! Woo! All right. Thank you for our wonderful volunteers in advance. All right. So I need someone to be Sarah, and someone to be Hagar, and someone to be Abraham, and someone to be Ishmael.
I'll be Abraham.
Abraham, Sarah. Who wants to be Hagar? Ishmael? All right. So, the story starts off. Isaac has been born, he's a little baby. So Sarah has a little baby, right? Just weaned. And Sarah sees Ishmael playing with the now probably slightly bigger than a baby since he's been weaned, smaller child. They're playing, jumping around. Woo-hoo. All right. And Sarah goes to Abraham and says, get rid of them. Get rid of Hagar and Ishmael. And Abraham talks to God, prays, and says, what should I do? And God says, do what your wife says. Because you should have figured that one out by now anyways. So Abraham goes to Hagar and Ishmael and gives Hagar some water and shoves them out of camp into the desert. All right, they wander around for a little while. All right, wander, and they run out of water. And Ishmael gets so weak that he, isn't moving around much. So Hagar puts him under a bush and then walks off a ways because thinking her child is going to die, I think fairly sensibly doesn't want to see. And then an angel comes to Hagar and says, don't worry. There's a well right over there. Get some water. Everything's going to be okay. Some water over. Woo-hoo. Oh, perfect. We got water. Ishmael gets a drink. And feels better. And lives a long, happy life. And has a nation in his name. All right. Thank you. All right. Sarah, hold on. I'm going to pick on Sarah because Sarah was the first part. So you get picked on a little bit. Why did you want Hagar and Ishmael kicked out? Loaded question?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, don't worry about it. Go ahead and take your seat. Thank you. The Bible is a beautiful book. It has all these wonderful stories, but what it is desperately lacking is the kind of stuff that we expect in good storytelling and books and movies and stuff, right? We have sort of the play-by-play, but what's going on in everyone's heads, right? Every once in a while we get a word, but we get very little to connect us with these characters, other than the choices that they make along the way. And when we're dealing with something as difficult as a text in Genesis, or really with anything in a book that was compiled about 1900 years ago or so. If we're going to try and put ourselves into the story, if we're going to try and see ourselves as part of this continuity, it's important that we take the time to understand these people and what's going on in their heads, because we experience the world from in here, not out here. And if we can try and figure out what's going on in here with them, and we're never going to know, but I think we have clues, then these feel more like real people and less like stick figures in a flip book of this story. So Sarah is the first person in this story that has much going on, right? She has the child, they have the celebration, and she sees Ishmael. Now, I don't know how familiar everyone is with the length of this story. Sarah is already quite advanced in age, as is her husband Abraham. They're told that Abraham will be the progenitor of nations, but she hasn't been able to have any children. And this is in a culture and a time where the purpose of human existence was to make more humans. So in that context, Sarah's not just someone struggling with infertility. Sarah is probably looked upon as cursed. I mean, she's been the woman most of her life where when she walks into the room, people stop talking kind of thing. And as someone who's lived a long time in a period where life expectancy is about 27 during the Bronze Age, she's had to deal with this for a long, long time. So she sees Ishmael playing. Ishmael is her husband's child with another woman, a slave that they had acquired from Egypt at some point. And something about watching Ishmael makes her upset enough to want them kicked out. I think I've heard two, I'm going to add on a third, of a possibility here. It's possible that having gone through that her whole life, there's real insecurity here about her future, right? Her child is not the oldest son, is not likely the full regular inheritor of everything that the family has. And as hard of a life as she has probably lived, with these social insecurities, with all of these people's looks and glances and whispers behind her back, knowing that's not really all gone is probably really hard to accept. Because even having a child, miraculously, there's still someone else in line for this blessing. So she goes to Abraham for comfort, for the sake of clearness, for the sake of really escaping the past that has probably haunted her. They need to send these two away. Another option that I have heard, and this goes into translation a little bit. I really like the NRSV's translation of this, because it shows Ishmael playing, it says. Literally, the word translated as playing here is the same root word as Isaac's name. So in some ways, she sees him Isaac-ing, and is reminded even more so of the comparison between her son. But the word also is, we don't need to get into Hebrew details here. The word is conjugated in a really weird way. You would not probably read this as laughing, which is the root. A lot of translations render it as mocking. It's not laughing, ha ha ha, good-natured laughing, it's laughing at someone. And in this, she sees Ishmael not playing with her son, but making fun of her child. That Ishmael then sort of becomes this rotten youth that is harassing her legitimate child. And she looks at that and says, that cannot inherit alongside my son. That she gets this sort of perfectionist, I don't know if I want to use the word elitist, but there's something about this, that it's not just that he's her husband's child with another woman, history, insecurities, but that something about the character of Ishmael in this moment bothers her, and she is terrified at the thought that this boy would become head of the family. There's a third option that's a little PG, and there aren't any children this morning, so that works out a little easier. I did a paper on this in seminary. The word used for playing here is used exactly one other place in literature that we have. And in that place it has a very sexual connotation, which is to say she might not witness Ishmael just playing with or mocking, but quite abusing her child. And if that's the case, which I have yet to see a translation willing to go that far, even though I have lots of paperwork that proves it's a viable translation option, I think her anger makes absolute perfect sense, right? I mean, this isn't even her own insecurity at this point. This isn't something about wanting things to be a certain way. She is furious. So she goes to Abraham. And Abraham is such a strange character. I mean, really, sometime, go through and try and take some time to sit and just read through Abraham's story, because he's alternately this extremely faithful, confident guy and, lies through his teeth, back and forth. He's just fascinating. But she goes to her husband and says they have to go, whether, for whichever of those reasons you want to believe it is. They gotta go. This is not some other child to Abraham. This is his own son, and older than Isaac, which means for at least some period of time, Abraham really believed that Ishmael, this child, is the carrier of the promise made to him, right? And he is being asked to banish more or less, sentence his child and his child's mother to death. I can't imagine that was easy. I can't imagine a scenario in which he would be okay with that, even if he shares her anger about what's going on. And so he prays, and God says, go with what Sarah says. And I don't know if that would be comforting, because in some respects now the decision's off of him, or if that just makes it harder to know that he doesn't have the option really to show the kind of mercy he may be inclined to his child. I don't know. But whether he is incredibly faithful or just a pushover, because both are options in his story, he sends Hagar and Ishmael out into the wilderness. Ishmael now is either a small, innocent boy who is simply in an inconvenient place to people with power, or a rather disturbed youth. In the story, how old does it sound like Ishmael is? Because when I read it, it sounds in this story like it's a small child, like Hagar is carrying him off. If you follow the genealogy, he's somewhere between 14 and 16 at this point. So the question is whether the stories are sort of out of order in some way, or what they're trying to do. But this child, who has grown up in weird circumstances, this kid has had a hard life. Whether or not he may be the child of the patriarch, but his mom is still a slave, and his other mom is probably not super happy about him one way or another. I think it would be a very strange experience to go through life where your father is the most powerful man in your community and your mother is a slave. And being torn between those worlds must have left Ishmael with a very complicated set of ideas in his head. But whichever way you want to read him, he is pushed out into the desert to die with his mother. There are few people that I feel as bad for in the biblical narrative as Hagar. Her name, by the way, literally means disposable. Literally means disposable. She was a slave bought from Egypt, and it doesn't give any of the circumstances of that, but it's not uncommon in this day and age. She was given as a helper to Sarah at some point. Sarah hands her off to her husband Abraham to have a kid, whether or not she wanted to. She gets to raise this child, still a slave herself, but raising, the next head of the family, and then that's ripped out under her as her son is then supplanted by Isaac, and then for doing everything she was asked and made to do, she's kicked out into the desert to die. And then, when her son is dying of thirst, and she can't even look at him, the angel comes down and says, I've heard the cries of the boy. Not Hagar. That God has heard the cries of the boy. It's really terrifyingly sad to think of how set aside Hagar is. Despite being probably like the most morally innocent person in the story. Like the one that hasn't done anything in these stories that warrants serious mistreatment at all. God hears Ishmael, whose name means God hears me. So it works out linguistically, but and they've discovered they're near a well that Abraham dug, if you follow the story back. So she's kicked out by Abraham and then finds water to save herself and her son from a well that, with likelihood, she had some help in digging as a slave in the community. These are not abstract personas. I mean, the story doesn't give you a lot of that to work with, but you can fit it in there. Like, I'm not really stretching on making sense out of this stuff, am I? These are real people, and we feel this way too. There are people I know who grow up in weird circumstances where probably one parent isn't a slave. That's not super common around here anymore, but broken families where there's really a discrepancy between how one does something and the other does something. There are people who make mistakes, even terrible ones, and horrible things happen despite the fact that they couldn't conceive of a world where that wasn't reasonable. There are people who have been derided their whole lives for nothing that they could have changed or done anything about. There are people who feel really forgotten and really have been. These are real people. Now, what I love in part about the Old Testament is how messy it is, which might be what people dislike about it so much. But when we're talking about seeing God at work in the lives of these people who are in a really strange and difficult, horrifying, possibly places, God's grace does not seem to make any sense, right? Because I dislike the talk that the New Testament is about grace and promise, and the Old Testament is about laws. No, there's grace everywhere if you're willing to look for it. Isaac was surely a grace to Sarah, who had suffered her whole life in shame. Ishmael is given basically the same promises as Isaac, right? Despite the fact that he's not even part of the covenant line at this point. I find that very interesting, that Isaac and Ishmael get roughly the same promises for a future to be the beginnings of whole peoples, but Isaac has a covenant to uphold, and Ishmael doesn't. I think that far too often in real life, just as in this story, the abundance of grace is also complicated by the fact that it's often not fully experienced by the people it's showered on. That however good of a promised future there might be, things are still really hard right now. And that's real life. Far too often. But grace is so scandalous in Scripture because it's poured out on the innocent and the guilty, right? Especially if you want to take the extreme readings of this. If Sarah is kind of petty and Ishmael is a criminal, and yet grace is poured out on them, and the most honorable character, Hagar, gets nothing. The scandalousness of grace at times is so hard to bear. But God is at work in the world, in all places, through us and around us. The early church was filled with people with broken lives and histories. Prostitutes, criminals, refugees, a sizable number of people that were later executed for treason. This is the story that continues through all of Scripture. It's not often, the nice, the good, the easygoing people who follow the rules that we find stories about. It's the complicated characters. The cross, after all, was reserved for people who challenged the social order, not random criminals. If we had gone with the gospel reading for today, we would have gotten Matthew's version of "Take up your cross and follow me." The cross was not a symbol of random difficulties in life. It was exclusively used for people who didn't think that things were as they should be, it was used for people who somehow didn't think that everyone got what they deserved. And if we are called to follow in those footsteps, then we are called to find ourselves in those messy situations as well. That when our lives are hard, to know that grace is still there. That when other people's lives are hard, when we are around our friends who are troublemakers, who have been victims, who have been perpetrators, that God is still at work in their lives. And how can we see that as well? We can't be the people we are expected to be, because the characters we have to work with as models definitely aren't the people we often expect them to be. Amen.